Привit. Good morning. I'm Chuck Olenek, a Ukrainian-American baptized with the name Yaroslav. That made it very convenient for me when I got into the Society for Creative Anachronism some 48 years ago. And I had to pick a name, I had to pick a persona. Well, my parents were Ukrainian immigrants, and I got all sorts of Ukrainian stuff hammered into me by my dad, actually both parents. And my dad said something about, not everyone's history is written down. You have to go find it. Okay, so 50 years or so of research, and I was going into all sorts of history, and I got into Slavic mythology and Slavic folklore. And oh, by the way, I'm using Slavic as just a general Eastern European thing, all right? Because I know there's other groups there that I'm also interested in researching who happen to not be Slavic, right? So I'm going through all this stuff, and I really got into the folk tales, and I got into the bogatiri and their stories. The bogatirs were the heroes of the age, heroes of the stories, and they served, they were kind of like almost superpowered, and they served Prince Volodymyr Bright Sun or Prince Volodymyr Red Sun in Kiev. And think of Kiev as the Slavic Camelot, all right? And Volodymyr is Arthur and that sort of thing. And I got into those stories real heavily, and I tried to put them in order, because as I'm doing them in video format, trying to share these stories, going, oh, that doesn't really work so good, because a lot of the internal details in the stories, they're different. There isn't a logic to it, but these stories fall into different motifs. Okay, so I got into retelling the folk tales. And then I ran into an issue yesterday. There was a Cossack folk tale called The Tale of the Wind, or The Story of the Wind. I prefer tale because it sounds more medieval. And I ran into an issue with certain details in the story, and I had to stop what I was working on because I had to try to figure out how was I going to deal with this issue. Now, I don't normally wear my chain when I do these videos because it just feels weird. However, I'm doing this in support of my king of Caid, Wilhelm Skallagrim. I believe he's the 6th now. He had posted something about 18 hours ago to the Kingdom page of how he was going to make an attempt to, no, I won't say make an attempt, because if he puts his mind to it, he'll do it. Step outside of his comfort zone and attempt to do Bardic stuff and attempt to develop classes. My king, this is in support of you. So I wanted to share some of the methods of doing this sort of thing, using folk tales and fairy tales in a period setting, and point out what kind of pitfalls you can run into. And one of the things that made me absolutely insane, I love these stories, one of the things that made me absolutely freaking insane is I would be reading about a character would travel hundreds of miles, and I'd say the word miles, I'm like, or I'd see inches. I mean, that's not very Slavic, and it would be worse when I'd run into stories where you would see references to, oh, let's not use miles, let's use kilometers. That's even worse. So that led to research on how do you measure things, and How do they handle distance? How do they handle weights? And, oh, okay. Or you'd see a character who is being paid off in rubles. Like, no, rubles are very late in period. But you also have to understand these stories were not written down until like the 18th century. Okay. However, I know these stories are a lot older than that. And there were people who traveled from, village to village telling these stories. And obviously the stories will have some inconsistencies, and that you end up finding, okay, there's certain similarities. It's like, hey, that character didn't do that, this other guy did that in another story. Okay, folk tales have motifs. There's over 600 stories of bogatiri. I haven't found them all yet, but of the ones that I found, there's similarities. Okay, so I ran into those issues, and I ran into issues about people being paid in a term that I think is not period. So one of the things that you need to actually do when you're looking at telling tales, look at the internal details. See what you can change that'll actually make it more period. Why not? Those stories changed all the time. Now we get to the part that stopped me. I ran into a very, I would say, disparaging reference to a group of people in Russia, and I had to stop and went, that's not so good. And that got me thinking about other things. This book has been sitting on my shelf for a couple of decades, and it uses the G word. We're not supposed to do that, at least in the society. The society is supposed to be about, when I got in, it's the concept of you're recreating the Middle Ages as they should have been. Okay, so we stay away from certain ideas. Just like, if you look at some of the designs, they're swastikas. We don't do swastikas. Swastikas are bad. There's a Slavic symbol called a kolovrat. It's basically, it's Slavic. It's, very period. Yeah, it's also an 8-legged swastika. Some people use it on their devices. Okay, looks good on you. Me, I'm not going to do that. And I was even sketching out as I was storyboarding something, and I decided I would use cross-stitch designs. So I put these around the borders, except that when I'm seeing this stuff in black and white, it's not really registering in my brain. So I'm coloring it in, one particular one. And then I stepped back and looked at the finished product, went, oh my God, that isn't a windmill, that's a swastika. So you don't do certain things. Well, so here I am. I'm telling you to stay away from certain types of things, or you change stuff so that it's more palatable. So at least you're not being really offensive. Then there was one story that I ran into. It was a Baba Yaga story. Okay, and you got good Baba Yaga stories and you got bad Baba Yaga stories. Bad Baba Yaga does the bad things. Alright? And there's the good Baba Yaga who helps out, the orphan. Okay, you got that thing going. Well, there was a Baba Yaga story I was starting to work on, because what I do is I collect a bunch of stories and I kind of put them into the big vault of knowledge. So it's either here all around. Actually, that's what I call this room. It's the vault of knowledge, because it's my office and library. Or I throw it in the computer, in the laptop. And I'm busy working on this one Baba Yaga story because I'd resolved, oh, I could tell a Baba Yaga story about every month. And I'm going through this story, and then I realized what the story was about, where there was a witch who wanted to put a curse on a royal family. And see, I wasn't going to tell the story, but now I have to tell you about it, which means I'm telling it in a short way. This witch puts a curse on this ring. And the curse is, this ring will fit your future bride. And what she does is she kind of does an end run around the mom, gives it to this prince. The only person this ring fits is his sister. And of course, people are appalled, and the prince is not like, no, that's what the prophecy is. The prophecy says that the person who can wear this ring will be my wife. And that's when I stopped working on that story. Because guess what? We don't need to do everything that's completely period. Because I don't feel like telling that kind of a story. There's enough dark stuff in Slavic lore. I don't need to go down that particular hellhole. All right, so just giving you some tips on how to do this. By the way, for those of you that are terrified of public speaking, you have a phone, record yourself, put it up on a YouTube channel. And yes, it's scary. It's really freaking scary to put your babies up there so that everyone can look at this stuff and go, oh really? You did that on purpose? And that was your best? Another tip that you might use, in school I had a stuttering problem, or a stammering problem. If you put me in front of a group of people, I sounded like Billy Bibbit in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And I got over it. Because I ended up getting over it. We don't need to go into how. But one of the things that I can do, like memorizing a script, I'm not so good at memorizing a script. So when I do the videos, I use a bunch of pictures and I try to do things Ken Burns style. And where I'll have a bit of me pontificating, knowledge, wisdom, blah, 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 and then throw in a picture or two, especially if they're period, that's awesome. And then do a voiceover to that. And you know what? That actually works out. So if you're interested in doing videos, why don't you try that approach? And then maybe, just maybe, you might get to the point where you actually tell a story, to the populace at some event. I'm going to confess, I did my first Bardic performance last year. All right, so I hope this helps out. Scala, this was for you. And until the next time, do pobачення.